Okay, so we're continuing our solving equations series, and now we're up into multi-step equations. So I wanted to show you another type of multi-step equation that you could have. Um, Now here's a case. If we go back to our little rules that we had from before, we have simplify, get rid of exponents or fractions, then distribute to get rid of parentheses. Remember, I said in previous videos that step number one is a step you're going to be able to skip probably 90% of the time. Um, but I wanted to show you these examples because they use step 2 in this example. And it also doesn't use step 3 when we do it, as you'll see it. So we're looking at our first equation here. We've got 26 is equal to 6 times 5 minus x. All right, so obviously there's no fractions or exponents, so we can skip step 1. But now we've got a parenthesis. So what we've got to do is what I call distribute. We use what's called the distributive property to get rid of these parentheses. And it's just a fancy way of saying multiply. So basically the rule is you multiply everything inside the parentheses by what's sitting outside of here. So you've got to do 6 times 5. That's going to equal 30. And then you do 6 times a minus x, which is going to be negative 6x. All right? And that's all there is to distributing. It's just multiplication. And then again, over here on the left, this 26 gets to come down and come along for the ride. So now we're left with a simple two-step equation. Notice step 3 would be to combine any like terms. But notice there are no like terms. So here's a case where you can skip step 1, do step 2, but also skip step 3. So again, these steps don't automatically mean that just because you do step 3, you're going to have to do step 2, you're going to have to do step 3. It just means this is the order in which you want to try to handle these things, because it makes your life a lot simpler to do it that way. Okay, so now we get to skip step 3. We're on to step 4, which is to add or subtract to get the variable alone. So I want to get x by itself. I can't deal with this negative 6 until I get rid of this 30. Remember, in the last video I also said we always look to the left of the number for the sign. Okay, just because this is minus does not mean we add 30 here. Okay, we look to the left for the sign. There is no sign. Remember, if there is no sign to the left, we assume that that's a positive. All right, so that's a plus 30. So if I want to get rid of plus 30, I have to minus 30. All right, and what I do on one side, I got to do to the other. So I'll come over here and I'll minus 30 on that side. All right, and then we just add up and down. Notice here 26 and negative 30, they're not, they don't have the same signs. Signs are different. That means you subtract. So 30 minus 26 is going to be 4. And then we keep the sign of the bigger number. In this case, 30 is the bigger number. So what we're left with is negative 4. So that's going to be equal to, that's going to cancel out. And my whole term, negative 6x, is going to drop down here. So the final step then, to get x by itself, we have to undo what's being done. Negative 6 times x, I've got to divide by negative 6. So here I'm dividing by negative 6. I'll divide this side by negative 6 as well. And remember, in the last video I said there's a bunch of different ways we're going to be able to write this answer. I'll show you again. First of all, the negative divided by negative, that means it's going to be positive, which means you can get rid of those. So your answer here would be 4 over 6 is equal to x. All right. This is a legitimate answer, but depending on what they ask you, how they ask you to write it, there could be other ways you could write it. Okay. 4 over 6 is technically correct, but if they say to simplify your fraction to its simplest form, this is going to be considered wrong, because you can reduce this fraction by dividing top and bottom by 2. If I reduce that to its simplest form, it's going to be 2 over 3. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. That's the simplest form of the fraction. Now, if it says to write your answer as a decimal, what we would do is we would either do long division or break out our handy-dandy graphing calculator. And we put 2 divided by 3. And what you'd get there would be 0.67 is equal to x. Notice all three of those answers are basically saying the same type of number. 4/6 is equal to 2/3 is equal to 0.67. They look different, but they all mean the same thing. They're all a fraction of the whole. So if you were to draw that little fraction as part of a piece of pie, 2/3 of that piece of pie would probably look something like that right there. Okay, so 4/6 of that pie looks the same as 2/3 of that pie, and then 0.67% of that pie is also the same. That's 67% of that pie. But you can ignore the pie stuff and just know that you can write this answer three different ways depending on how they ask you to write it. Moving on to the next example, again, running through our steps. If you simplify fractions or exponents, there are none. Skip that step. Second step is to distribute. Get rid of the parentheses. So in this case, there is a parentheses. So what we're going to do is multiply -4 across both of those terms. So -4 times x, a number times a letter, just means butt the number up against a letter. -4x. And then -4 times 6 is going to be -24. And then the -40 can drop down. Then we move on to our next step, which is to combine like terms. Notice, again, this is a case where you can skip that step. There's nothing to combine there. Fourth step is to add or subtract to get the variable by itself. Here's the variable. We want to get it by itself. I can't deal with this -4 until I deal with this -24. So what I want to do is to add 24 to both sides. So what I'm left with here is -4x is equal to, and again, signs are different, so you'll subtract. 40 minus 24 is going to be 16. Keep the sign of the bigger number, means it's negative. All right. And then final step, multiply or divide to solve. We're multiplying x by -4, so to undo that, we're going to divide by -4. And again, we do it to both sides. X is equal to negative divided by negative is positive. 16 divided by 4 does give us a nice whole number. It's going to be equal to 4. So there's how you handle equations with parentheses in them. All you got to do is distribute and then solve like a two-step equation. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thank you.